Hi, everybody. Is the LiveShip Traders Trilogy better than Farseer? I'm going to get into, if nothing else, how complicated rankings are for my reading taste. And I know this is going to be an easy answer for some readers versus others. For me, it's not so straightforward, but we'll get into that. First, I'm going to go into an overview of the LiveShip Traders and talk about what we're dealing with. So this will serve as a review as well as a light comparison towards the end. So first of all, the LiveShip Traders Trilogy is the second trilogy in the larger realm of the Elderlings. So the Farseer Trilogy is in first-person narration following a character named Fitzchivalry. It takes place in a location in the world called the Six Duchies, whereas the LiveShip Traders takes place in a different part of the world, and it is multi-perspective. So we are following several characters throughout this trilogy. I lost count of how many. Somebody in the comments may have an answer to that. You will get to know each one of these characters very well. And the other thing that's special about the LiveShip Traders Trilogy is that we have sentient ships. It is largely nautical fantasy. These live ships are made of a rare commodity called wizard wood that comes from the Rainwild region. And what's also special about the wizard wood is that it creates these ships that are the only ships that are able to travel on the Rainwild River. So that's important to note. But the other thing is that once these ships are created, after we have so many generational deaths in a family line and the person's body and blood seep into the wizard wood, after a while that wizard wood not only absorbs the blood of so many family members, it also absorbs the memories of those family members. And eventually that ship will come alive. Their live ship Vivacia quickens, comes alive during a economically turbulent time for the family, as there is an influx of slavery that's coming to the town where they reside, into Bingtown. So there's a lot of exploitation. There are larger political things that happen in this story. But to keep things more concise here, I'm not going to get into the politics of the world. I'll simply say that you get to know the politics more deeply as you go on in the story, as it seems more in the backdrop at first. It comes into the forefront more and more as you go on, and you get a fair amount of exposition, I think around the 75-page mark. So the Vestrit family ends up in somewhat of a family squabble due to the economic situation and the live ship quickening, and they're trying to make sense of what to do moving forward, and this causes the family members to diverge, and other characters obviously start to come into the story as well. So we have a pirate. Piracy takes place in this world as well. We have a pirate named Kenneth who wants to be a pirate king.
But I am a pirate king, and it is a glorious thing to be a pirate king.
He's on his journey to become so, and you see how his storyline will intersect with the Vestrit storyline. We also get the perspectives of the Rainwild family as we go on in the trilogy. And the Rainwilds are interesting as they are living in a region that is considered cursed. The river there is quite toxic, and as a result, they end up having some skin that is less than aesthetic. And so this is something that is of interest in the story as well. Now I'm going to transition into the themes of the story, and it's important to recognize that trade is a way of life for the people in this world, especially as the Bingtown traders, they rely on trade for economic stability, and the Rainwild region as well. They have trader families there. So trade, I think also it comes across as transaction, agreements among groups of people, but also agreements or oaths between individuals. And there's an exploration of what are the repercussions when an oath cannot be honored over time. And also, what happens, what are the consequences of following through on an oath and finding it has negative consequences that can occur. So there are some conflicts that arise when it comes to these transactional agreements among people, whether it's agreements between individuals or larger groups of people. And then I would say, in contrast to transactional agreements between people, we have slavery in the world. So slavery clearly exists in this world, but we also have different kinds of ways of understanding slavery, or bondage, I would say, is another way of thinking about that, when people are forced into situations against their own will, and even the idea of whether a sailor can be some form of slave, whether they are beholden to whatever the captain wants, and also the live ships themselves, whether they have a form of bondage with the captain of the ship, or with the family in which they are connected to. So we see this bondage, coercement, slavery aspect to the story. We also have different forms of abuse that takes place or are explored in the story, and also gaslighting, victim blaming as a result of that abuse. But in addition to slavery and transactional agreements, we also have the theme of self-sacrifice that takes place in the story. And I would say, in addition to self-sacrifice or selflessness, doing something without the need for something in return, we also have characters that are just plain selfish. So you get a range of these different types of ways of orienting in the world. And we also see how this creates conflicts for individual characters and combinations of conflict. Each character has a different internal conflict. And I think that the character work is where this book shines. I've been saying over and over again about this trilogy how much I admire the way that Robin Hobb not only presents the world through exposition, but makes you feel it through the character perspectives. I feel as though she has a great flow with her writing, great imagery that's evoked, and I feel as though she's able to give you the internal worlds or the internal thoughts of characters that give you this beautiful gradation of tone without being overly melodramatic. It feels natural, and yet it feels like it gives you so much of what the world is doing with these characters and how the characters are relating to the world. Another thing I think is explored in this trilogy is the inability to go backwards. When things change, when the world changes, you have to learn to adapt. You have to learn to change. And at the same time, how do we embrace change? How do we adapt without completely compromising our values? It made me think a lot about our current situation with AI, as that seems to be a hot topic lately in our world, and how a lot of people are just jumping on board and saying, okay, let me sign up for ChatGPT, and not thinking about the consequences of that. And then some people are fixated on the consequences of that, but at the same time, we can't avoid the issue altogether. And then on the flip side of this particular theme, I would say is something quite different, which is the inability to escape memory or trauma. Now, we have some characters in the story, including the perspective of sea serpents, that want to remember, that are trying to bring back certain memories that were taken from them. And yet we also have characters in this story who want to forget horrible things that have happened and move on from that. So escaping the past, escaping memory turns out not to be so simple. And then lastly, I'll talk about destiny, as the last book is called Ship of Destiny. And when you hear the word destiny, often we associate that with something that rings with optimism and with this sense of fulfillment of living one's purpose. Whereas I think in this book, the conversations about destiny in some ways have to do not only with purpose, but also with this idea that we as humans are tiny, insignificant creatures in the grand scheme of things, and that we have to learn to let go of our self-importance and do what we can with what's around us. It was an interesting conversation to have in the third book, but it was there. Now I'm going to talk about my reading experience of the trilogy, and I'll go ahead and say it. Ship of Magic was my favorite book in the trilogy. I fell in love with every character perspective in this story, with the exception of sea serpents, as I've mentioned in previous videos. Never quite got into those, but they were infrequent sections in the book. Otherwise, I loved every character, and I loved the transitions between chapters, between perspectives. I found that the writing flowed so beautifully. I love the imagery that Robin Hobb evokes, the introduction to the world. It was a near perfect reading experience for me. Now, when it comes to books 2 and 3, my feelings get more complicated. So first, to talk about Madship, I'll go ahead and say one of the highlights of Madship was a character that I fell in love with and that became the star of the show for me. The downside is that there were 3 love triangles in Madship. One was bizarre and maybe a bit interesting because of how bizarre it was. Another love triangle was very YA, and I was honestly invested in that. I'm not typically somebody who invests in YA romances, but I enjoyed that one because it had a certain character that I loved. And then the other love triangle, I did not care for at all. It read to me like a soap opera. I found myself not wanting to pick up the book anytime we were in these perspectives. And so for me, it just didn't quite flow as well. It took me a long time to read Madship. It took me a much longer time than the other two books because I found that there were certain sections I just didn't quite connect with as much. But that said, some of the high points in the series I feel happen in Madship. So it's a mixed bag for me. And then Ship of Destiny. Ship of Destiny for me was much like Ship of Magic. I loved my reading experience of Ship of Destiny. I found myself not wanting to put the book down. I was invested in what was happening with the characters, where the story was going. But the thing that made this not quite as strong for me was the end. There was a storyline in the last 20% of the book that did not work for me at all. And the more I think about it, the more frustrated I feel thinking about the storyline and what started to develop and the way it resolved. And I just didn't quite buy it. I didn't understand the need for it at all. And so this is a complicated topic, and I want to save thoughts for a spoiler discussion that might be on the horizon. But I am very negative about how one of the storylines ended, and I was fairly satisfied with how other storylines ended. So Ship of Destiny, a bit of a mix there. I was warned. I knew that there was a storyline at the end of Ship of Destiny that was quite polarizing, and I can understand why. So I'll just leave my thoughts about Ship of Destiny there. But yes, I would definitely put Ship of Magic above the other two. And then given, again, my mix with Madship, it took me so much longer to read, and then the highs were high, but Ship of Destiny, really high highs, but then real low with one of the endings. It makes them almost equal, I guess. I don't know how to rank them. I think I need more time to figure out which of those two I prefer, Ship of Destiny or Madship. Now to get into comparisons between FARSEER Trilogy and LIVESHIP TRADERS Trilogy. Of course, I'm going to be talking about my own personal feelings, but I'll try to give some thoughts that might appeal to people who have different reading tastes than I do, as we're all different readers here. So when it comes to FARSEER Trilogy, your investment in this trilogy is largely going to depend on whether you like the character of Fitz or not, because Fitz is telling the story. So if you don't like Fitz from book one, chances are you're not going to enjoy the rest of the trilogy. And I happen to be a Fitz fan, so I enjoyed the Farseer Trilogy. But another thing I'll quickly say is that for being first-person narration, I feel as though Hobb does a masterful job of fleshing out other characters through Fitz's perspective. So for me, the characters were excellent in Farseer Trilogy, but on the flip side, when it comes to LiveShip Traders, the highlight is that you get so many other character perspectives. And this was a huge plus for me, but it can also be lower risk for other readers because, again, if you don't like Fitz in Farseer, then you're going to have trouble getting through that trilogy. Whereas in LiveShip Traders, if you don't care for one character or two characters, there's a good chance you might enjoy other characters. And so I think that the risk, again, is lower because of that. Now, for me, I loved most of the characters in LiveShip Traders. There was one character that became a bit inconsistent for me from books 2 to 3. And so my feelings about that character declined over time. And I also explained that I didn't really care for the sea serpent perspectives. I didn't think those were quite frequent. So I would still give a plus to LiveShips. And I think if I had to choose between the two trilogies, maybe LiveShip Traders. Next is world building. And when it comes to world building, this is where, again, I love what Hobb does, because in the Farseer Trilogy, we get Fitz's perspective, and we get this idea of the politics of the Six Duchies that is going on in the backdrop of the story at first. And little by little, she unfolds the greater layers to the politics and to what's going on through Fitz's perspective. And I feel like she does a very similar thing through the characters in LiveShip Traders. But where it goes a step further for me in LiveShip Traders versus Farseer is that because we have characters that are in various places, you start to see how the movement of one character might affect another character, and how a political decision here might affect what's going on over here. And I think that the way she did that, and not in a way that was too blatant, but in a way where you as a reader could put things together and think, oh no, if this person succeeds, I want them to succeed. But if they succeed, then it might work against this other character I care about over here. And I loved that. I loved the way she did that. So for me, world building, I prefer LiveShip Traders over Farseer, though again, I think it's still well done in FARSEER Trilogy. When it comes to the magic in the FARSEER Trilogy is an empathy type of magic, the skill. I don't remember a ton about this, except that we have an animal companion that Fitz ends up bonding with, and it has a special emotional significance, I would say, especially if you invest in that animal companion. So for me, the magic worked really well in Farseer. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the conflicts that came about when it came to the magic. And with live ships, I would say some of the magic was excellent. I enjoyed the way that the ships came to life. At the same time, there were some aspects to the way magic was used that didn't quite work for me, and this has to do with the ending of the trilogy. And so I have some mixed feelings about the magic when it comes to live ships. The magic is going to be interconnected as it's all part of the same world in Farseer and live ships, but I think that the way it's displayed is different. And I'm trying to think if I have a preference, and this is hard because it's almost like choosing between Night Eyes, a certain animal companion in the Farseer trilogy, versus the live ships. And I think I might have to go with Night Eyes. So maybe I would choose Farseer. Next, I'll talk about the reading experience. And this is complicated for me because it's been a while now since I've read the Farseer trilogy. And so I'm just drawing off memory. I have recency bias with LiveShip Traders, but I'll say with Farseer, what I remember is that I loved it and I remember enjoying it so much, but the reading experience overall was fairly even. I do remember feeling like Assassin's Quest, while I enjoyed it, I don't know that I enjoyed it more than the first two books. I might have enjoyed the first two books more than the third book. And it was very even between the first two books. I had a difficult time deciding whether I preferred Assassin's Apprentice versus Royal Assassin, but I will say I love the end of Royal Assassin more than any other part in the trilogy. So that's my experience with Farseer, but when it comes to LiveShip Traders, I would say that the highs were higher and the lows were lower. So when I read Ship of Magic, I immediately thought this completely exceeds anything from Farseer Trilogy for me. I immediately thought it rose high above. And then when it came to Mad Ship and Ship of Destiny, it varies dramatically depending on what part of the story I was reading. So this is where it gets so complicated. I can't make up my mind. An even great reading experience or one that rises up higher at times, but then shoots lower at times. I don't know how to weigh that. I don't know how to assess that. This is why I don't rate books, by the way. So it's maybe even across the board when we compare those two things. And then next is ending. And I remember when it came to the Farseer trilogy, I thought the ending was fine. I remember one of my discussions that a criticism that people bring up when it comes to Assassin's Quest is that even though the book is very slow paced, and even I can acknowledge that book is slow paced, and I'm somebody who tends to enjoy slower paced books than most people. Some people have brought up the criticism that the ending of Assassin's Quest is rushed. With further reflection, I remember I kept thinking about it after that discussion. And with reflection, I can see why people think that. I could see how that might seem like a rushed ending, considering everything. And at the same time, I think I'm more positive about the ending of Farseer Trilogy than I am with the ending of LiveShip Traders, given that one storyline I really did not care for the ending of. Again, I enjoyed the other endings that occur at the end of LiveShip. And I will say this, I am more than eager to pick up the next book in the realm of the Elderlings, if that tells you anything. So I might give this one to Farseer, though this is challenging. This is another challenging one for me. Next, I just want to say tone and imagery across the board are excellent across both series. I feel as though she just evokes imagery so beautifully and also handles exposition in such a personal way, which I appreciate. Politics as well. She handles politics in a personal way. And I guess that's where I land. Now, did I enjoy Farseer more than LiveShip Traders? I think I enjoyed LiveShip Traders more. but only because, again, the highs were higher and the lows were lower, but I'm trying really hard not to let the lows overpower my feelings about the story, because so much of the story was so immersive and so addictive, especially in books 1 and 3. So again, if nothing else, this just illustrates how difficult rankings are for me. And like I said, I am so excited to pick up the next book. I think it's Fool's Errand. I think that's the next book in the Realm of the Elderlings, and I can't wait. I'm so excited to continue Realm of the Elderlings. I don't think it's going to take as long for me to get to the next trilogy as it was between FARSEER Trilogy and Ship of Magic, but those are my thoughts for now. Again, a spoiler discussion maybe on the horizon, in which I will go into more detail about the things that didn't work for me and what did. So thank you so much for watching. Please let me know in the comment section below if you've read these trilogies or if you're planning to read them. I would love to hear from you. And if you just want to say hi to let me know you're here, please do so. Thank you again. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.